Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be a genius? Is it about mastering one skill to perfection, or is it something more? Tonight, we're journeying back in time to the heart of the Renaissance, a period of explosive creativity and intellectual rebirth that spanned from the 14th to the 17th century. And we're going to explore this question through the life of one man who arguably defines the very concept of genius, Leonardo da Vinci. The term Renaissance man or Renaissance genius gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? It describes a person with broad knowledge and expertise in many different fields. They aren't just a painter or a scientist or an inventor. They are all of these things and more. They see the world not as a collection of separate subjects, but as an interconnected whole, and no one embodied this ideal more perfectly than Leonardo. Born in 1452 in the small Tuscan town of Vinci, Leonardo showed an insatiable curiosity from a very young age. He wasn't just interested in what things were, but how they worked. This relentless curiosity would become the driving force of his entire life. He began his career as an apprentice in the workshop of the renowned artist Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence. Here, he didn't just learn to paint and sculpt. He was also trained in mechanics, chemistry, metallurgy, and drafting. This multidisciplinary education laid the foundation for everything that was to come. Of course, when we think of Leonardo, we often first think of his art. Masterpieces like the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper are among the most famous and revered paintings in history. But what makes them so special? It's the science, asterisk behind asterisk. The art Leonardo was obsessed with understanding the human form. He spent countless hours dissecting human and animal bodies, which was a controversial practice at the time to understand every muscle, bone, and sinew. This deep anatomical knowledge is what gives his figures such lifelike realism and emotional depth. Look at the subtle smile of the Mona Lisa. It's not just a painted expression. It's the result of a profound understanding of facial musculature. He was also a pioneer in the use of techniques like asterisk sfumato asterisk, a method of softening the transition between colors to create a hazy, atmospheric effect. He understood light and shadow not just as an artist, but as a physicist. He studied optics to see how light reflects and refracts, and he applied these principles to his canvases to create an unparalleled sense of three-dimensional space and realism. For Leonardo, art was not just about creating beauty. It was a science, a way of investigating and representing the natural world. But his artistic genius was just one facet of his incredible mind. If we could look inside his famous notebooks, we would find a world of scientific and engineering marvels that were centuries ahead of their time. He sketched designs for flying machines, including a helicopter-like aerial screw and an ornithopter with flapping wings. Inspired by his detailed studies of bird flight, he envisioned armored tanks, diving suits, and even rudimentary robots. He understood the principles of friction, gearing, and hydraulics. His scientific inquiries were boundless. He was a geologist who correctly theorized that fossils were the remains of ancient life and that mountains were formed over immense geological time. He was a botanist who studied the structure of plants and the patterns of leaf growth. He was a cartographer who created incredibly accurate maps. He designed bridges, canals, and water systems. In every field he touched, Leonardo applied the same rigorous process: observe, question, experiment, and record. His notebooks, filled with over 13,000 pages of notes and drawings, are a testament to a mind that never stopped working, never stopped questioning, So, what does this all tell us about the concept of the Renaissance genius? It tells us that true genius isn't about being siloed in one discipline. It's about cultivating a boundless curiosity and seeing the connections that others miss. Leonardo saw the same principles of flow and turbulence in the currents of a river as he did in the curls of human hair. He saw the mathematics of proportion in both the human body and the architecture of a grand cathedral. For him, art and science were not separate pursuits. They were two sides of the same coin, two languages for describing the beauty and complexity of the universe. This holistic approach is perhaps Leonardo's most enduring legacy. He taught us that innovation often happens at the intersection of different fields. An artist who understands anatomy can create more powerful figures. An engineer who studies nature can design more efficient machines. His life challenges us to break down the artificial barriers we've built between the arts and the sciences, between creativity and logic. In our modern world, we often specialize early and focus on a narrow field of expertise. But the story of Leonardo da Vinci serves as a powerful reminder of the value of being a polymath, of having a wide range of interests and skills. It encourages us to be curious, to ask why and how, and to never stop learning. The spirit of the Renaissance genius is not something confined to the past. It's an ideal we can all aspire to in our own lives by embracing curiosity and looking for the hidden connections that unite our world. Leonardo wasn't just a painter or an inventor. He was a master observer of life itself, and his work continues to inspire us to see the world with the same sense of wonder. Michelangelo and art in the service of divine inspiration. Imagine looking up at a ceiling so vast, so filled with life and color, that it feels like the heavens themselves have opened up, or standing before a statue so perfectly carved it seems ready to breathe. This is the world of Michelangelo, a titan of the Renaissance whose hammer and brush didn't just create art. They channeled the divine. Today, we're journeying back to 14th to 17th century Italy to explore how one man, Michelangelo Buonarroti, transformed stone and plaster into powerful sermons, and how his art became a profound expression of faith. The Renaissance was a time of incredible change. It was a rebirth of classical Greek and Roman ideas, but it was also a period of intense religious feeling. In this era, art wasn't just for decoration. It was a tool for communication, a way to tell the epic stories of the Bible to a population that, for the most part, couldn't read. Artists were the storytellers, the theologians, the visionaries who made the sacred tangible, and at the pinnacle of this tradition stood Michelangelo. He wasn't just an artist. He saw himself as an instrument of God. He believed that the figures he carved were already hidden within the marble, and it was his divine duty to liberate them. This idea of divine inspiration was central to Michelangelo's entire life and work. For him, the act of creation was a spiritual struggle, a deeply personal conversation with God. He saw beauty, especially the beauty of the human form, as a reflection of divine perfection. This philosophy, known as Neoplatonism, taught that the physical world was a shadow of a higher spiritual reality. So, when Michelangelo carved a figure, he wasn't just copying what he saw. He was trying to capture a glimpse of that divine ideal to make the spiritual visible. This belief infused his work with an unmatched power and intensity. It's why his figures seem to pulse with an inner life and a profound sense of spiritual longing. Let's look at his first masterpiece, the Pietà, located in St. Peter's, but carved when he was only in his early 20s. It depicts the Virgin Mary cradling the body of Christ after the crucifixion. Look at the serene, youthful face of Mary. There's a quiet, accepting sorrow there, not the tormented grief you might expect, and the body of Christ is rendered with anatomical precision, yet it seems peaceful, almost asleep. Michelangelo wasn't just showing a historical event. He was meditating on the nature of sacrifice, faith, and divine love. He signed this piece, the only one he ever did, by carving his name across the sash on Mary's chest. It was a bold statement from a young artist, announcing not just his skill, but his personal connection to this sacred story. Then there is David, a colossal statue carved from a single flawed block of marble that other artists had abandoned. Where previous artists had shown David asterisk after asterisk his victory over Goliath, Michelangelo chose the moment asterisk before asterisk the battle. Look at the tension in his body, the furrowed brow, the intense gaze. This isn't just a boy with a slingshot. This is a symbol of faith and courage in the face of impossible odds. David's strength isn't just physical, it's spiritual. He is powered by his unwavering belief in God. The statue became a symbol for the city of Florence itself, a small republic facing powerful enemies, trusting in its own divine right to be free. Through David, Michelangelo transformed a block of stone into a powerful statement about faith, courage, and the human spirit's potential when aligned with a higher purpose. But perhaps his most famous struggle with divine inspiration unfolded on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. He was reluctant to take on the massive project commissioned by Pope Julius II. For 4 years, he lay on his back on scaffolding, battling physical pain, technical challenges, and his own self-doubt. He described the process as torture. Yet, what emerged is one of the greatest artistic achievements in human history. He didn't just paint a ceiling. He created an entire theological universe, from the iconic creation of Adam, where the fingers of God and man almost touch, to the dramatic scenes of the Great Flood. Michelangelo painted the epic story of humanity's relationship with God. The creation of Adam is particularly brilliant. It's not just a picture of creation. It's a visual representation of the divine spark. God is depicted as a powerful, dynamic figure, sweeping through the heavens, while Adam is earthbound, languid, waiting to receive the gift of life. That tiny gap between their fingers is charged with all the potential of humanity. It's a moment of pure, divine energy being transferred through this single image. Michelangelo communicates a complex theological idea with breathtaking simplicity and power. The entire ceiling is a testament to his belief that art could elevate the soul and bring the viewer closer to understanding God's plan. Years later, a much older and more somber Michelangelo returned to the Sistine Chapel to paint the Last Judgment on the altar wall. This work is vastly different from the ceiling. It's darker, more chaotic, reflecting the turmoil of the Reformation and his own anxieties about salvation. Christ is no longer the gentle shepherd, but a powerful, muscular judge. The saved rise to heaven while the damned are dragged down into hell. It's a terrifying and awe-inspiring vision in a bold and personal touch. Michelangelo painted his own flayed skin in the hand of Saint Bartholomew, a raw and vulnerable self-portrait that speaks volumes about his own fears and his plea for divine mercy. This wasn't just a commission, it was a public confession, a final, desperate prayer rendered in paint for all the world to see. Michelangelo's legacy is immense. He showed that art could be more than just beautiful. It could be a form of worship, a theological argument, a personal prayer. He elevated the status of the artist from a mere craftsman to a divinely inspired genius. his relentless pursuit of perfection, his physical and spiritual struggles, and his profound faith are etched into every piece he created. He demonstrated that through stone and paint, one could explore the deepest questions of human existence, our relationship with God, our struggle between the physical and the spiritual, and our ultimate quest for salvation. His work continues to inspire awe and reverence, reminding us that art, at its very best, can serve as a bridge between our world and the realm of the divine. Raphael and balance in composition. Have you ever looked at a painting and just felt a sense of perfect harmony? Like every single element is exactly where it's supposed to be, creating a feeling of profound peace and order. Tonight, we dive in deep into the world of one of the masters who achieved this better than almost anyone else, the great Raphael. We'll explore how this high Renaissance genius used the principle of balance to create some of the most iconic and beloved artworks in history. So, who was Raphael? Born Raffaello Sanzio da Urbinum em 1483, to the great trinity of high Renaissance masters, alongside Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. While Leonardo was the universal genius and Michelangelo the tormented sculptor, Raphael was known as the master of grace, harmony, and, you guessed it, balance. He had an incredible ability to absorb the best ideas from his contemporaries and synthesize them into something uniquely his own, something serene and perfectly composed. To understand Raphael's genius, we first need to talk about what balance means in art. It's not just about making sure a painting doesn't look lopsided. Balance in composition is the way artists arrange visual elements like figures, colors, light, and space to create a sense of stability and visual equilibrium. There are a few types of balance, but the two most important for understanding Raphael are symmetrical and asymmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance is the easiest to spot. Imagine drawing a line down the middle of a painting. If both sides are more or less a mirror image of each other, that's symmetrical balance. It creates a feeling of formality, stability, and calm. It is often used in religious or official art to convey a sense of divine order and perfection. Think of a classic church facade that's symmetrical balance in architecture. Asymmetrical balance is a bit trickier, but often more dynamic. Here, the two sides of the composition are not mirror images, but they still feel balanced. How? An artist might balance a large, simple shape on one side with several smaller, more complex shapes on the other. Or a dark, heavy area might be balanced by a smaller, brightly colored area that draws the eye. It is like a visual seesaw where a big person on one end can be balanced by a smaller person sitting further out on the other. This type of balance feels more modern, natural, and full of life. Raphael was an absolute master of both. Let's start by looking at one of his most famous early works, The Marriage of the Virgin, painted in 1504. At first glance, this painting screams symmetrical balance. We have a beautiful temple in the background, perfectly centered. The main figures, Mary, Joseph, and the high priest, are grouped in the middle. On either side, we have attendants, creating a near-perfect mirror image. This formal, symmetrical structure gives the sacred event a sense of divine order and profound importance. It's calm, it's stable, it's everything a holy ceremony should feel like. The balance is so perfect, it's almost architectural. But Raphael was too clever for simple symmetry. Look closer. On the right, we see the rejected suitors, one of whom is dramatically breaking his rod over his knee. This introduces a bit of dynamic action and asymmetry. On the left, the maidens are calmer. This subtle difference prevents the painting from feeling static or boring. Raphael uses the rigid framework of symmetry but injects just enough life into it to keep our eyes engaged. It's a masterclass in controlled composition. Now, let's jump forward just a few years to Raphael's time in Rome, where he painted the legendary School of Athens around 1510. This fresco, located in the Vatican, is one of the pinnacles of Western art, and at its heart is a brilliant use of both symmetrical and asymmetrical balance to organize a huge crowd of figures. The overall structure is, once again, powerfully symmetrical. The grand classical architecture, with its series of arches, recedes into the distance, perfectly framing the two central figures, Plato and Aristotle. They are the philosophical and compositional core of the entire masterpiece. The figures on the left and right are arranged in corresponding groups, creating a grand, sweeping sense of order and intellectual harmony. This symmetry tells us we are in a place of high ideals, of balanced thought and rational discourse. But within this grand symmetrical stage, Raphael works his magic with the symmetry. Look at the groups of philosophers. They aren't arranged in stiff, identical rows. On the lower right, the geometer Euclid, said to be a portrait of the architect Bramante, bends down with his students, forming a tight, circular group. On the lower left, Pythagoras is engrossed in a book, surrounded by his own cluster of followers. These individual groupings are asymmetrical. They are full of life, interaction, and movement. Raphael is essentially creating small, dynamic scenes within a larger, stable framework. This allows him to manage dozens of figures without the painting feeling chaotic. It's organized complexity, a perfect balance between order and life. It's like a great symphony with a clear structure but with intricate, beautiful melodies weaving in and out. Perhaps the most famous example of Raphael's mastery of compositional balance, however, can be found in his many Madonna and child paintings. These works are celebrated for their tenderness and humanity, and much of that feeling comes from their flawless composition. A fantastic example is the Madonna of the Meadow from 1506. The three figures, the infant Jesus and the young John the Baptist, are arranged in a clear pyramidal or triangular composition. Mary's head is the apex of the triangle, and the two children form the base. The pyramid is one of the most stable shapes in geometry, and using it in a composition instantly creates a sense of grounded, unshakable balance and harmony. It's a device Raphael learned from Leonardo da Vinci, but he perfected it, making it feel completely natural and effortless. The figures aren't just plopped into a triangle. They are connected through gestures and gazes. Mary looks down at the children with loving tenderness. John the Baptist kneels in adoration before Jesus, who in turn reaches out to touch John's cross. These interactions create a circular flow of energy within the stable pyramid, drawing the viewer's eye from one figure to the next. The calm landscape in the background further enhances the serene mood. The result is a painting that feels both divinely perfect and deeply human. The balance isn't just a technical trick. It's the very source of the painting's emotional power. So, why was balance so important to Raphael and the High Renaissance? Because it reflected their worldview. This was an era that valued order, reason, and the pursuit of perfection. They believed in a divinely ordered universe, and artists sought to reflect that cosmic harmony in their work. For Raphael, A balanced composition wasn't just good design, it was a visual representation of a perfect, ideal world. His paintings are not just beautiful to look at, they are windows into a world of grace, order, and serene perfection. Raphael's influence was immense for centuries. After his death, artists studied his compositions, learning how to arrange figures and create that signature sense of harmony. The Raphaelesque style became the gold standard for academic painting. His use of the pyramid, his blending of symmetry and asymmetry, and his ability to make complex scenes feel clear and ordered became fundamental lessons for any aspiring artist. By mastering the art of balance, Raphael did more than just create pretty pictures. He created visual poetry. He gave form to feelings of peace, stability, and grace. He showed us that by carefully arranging the parts, you can create a whole that is infinitely greater and more beautiful. The next time you see a painting that just feels right, take a moment to think about its balance. You might just be seeing the timeless genius of Raphael at work. Donatello and realistic sculpture. Tonight, we're journeying back to the heart of the Italian Renaissance, a time of explosive creativity and innovation. While names like Leonardo, Da Vinci, and Michelangelo might be the first to come to mind, we're going to shine a spotlight on a true pioneer, a master sculptor whose work literally carved the path for all who followed. His name was Donatello, and his quest for realism changed the art world forever. Imagine Florence in the early 1400s. The city is buzzing with new ideas, rediscovering the classical art of ancient Greece and Rome. But for centuries, sculpture, especially religious sculpture, had been quite rigid and stylized. Figures often looked flat, lacking emotion and lifelike presence. They were symbols more than they were people. And then along came Donato di Niccolò di Beto-Bardi, or as the world would know him, he looked at the marble and bronze around him and saw not just stone and metal, but the potential for flesh, bone, and soul. One of Donatello's earliest breakthroughs was his statue of St. George, created for a niche on the outside of a Florentine church. At first glance, it might look like a standard statue of a knight, but look closer. Notice the determined set of his jaw, the furrow in his brow. He's not just a generic saint. He's a young, vigilant warrior caught in a moment of intense concentration, ready to face the dragon. Donatello has captured the psychological state. He's thinking, he's feeling. This was revolutionary. Donatello was one of the first to bring this kind of inner life, this human emotion, back into sculpture since the days of the ancients. He didn't just stop at marble. Donatello was a master of materials, and his work in bronze is arguably even more influential. Let's talk about his David. No, not Michelangelo's towering giant, but Donatello's earlier and, in many ways, more groundbreaking version. Cast in bronze, this was the first freestanding nude statue made since Antiquity. Truly bold move for the time. This isn't a muscular, godlike hero. He's a slender, almost boyish youth. His pose, a classical escurve, known as contrapposto, gives him a relaxed, naturalistic stance. He stands with one foot on the severed head of Goliath, a faint, enigmatic smile on his face. This statue is complex. It's a mix of classical beauty and biblical narrative, conveying a sense of quiet confidence and youthful grace. By choosing to depict David in this way, Donatello wasn't just telling a story. He was making a profound statement about the beauty of the human form and the power of naturalism. Donatello's genius was his incredible versatility. He could create works of immense power and works of incredible tenderness. Consider his sculpture of Mary Magdalene. This is not the idealized, beautiful saint you might expect. Instead, Donatello carves her from wood as a haggard, emaciated figure worn down by years of penance in the desert. Her clothes are rags, her hair is matted, but her hands are clasped in prayer, and her expression is one of deep spiritual devotion. It's a shocking, raw, and incredibly powerful portrayal of faith. Donatello dared to show that spirituality wasn't always beautiful in a conventional sense. It could be found in suffering and endurance. He forces the viewer to look past the physical appearance and connect with the profound emotion within. This dedication to emotional truth, even when it was difficult or unsettling, is a hallmark of his work. Another key innovation Donatello pioneered was a technique called sciacciato, which means flaton occhi in Italian. It's a form of very shallow relief carving that creates an incredible illusion of depth. You can see this brilliantly in his relief panel called The Feast of Herod. He carves the scene on a bronze plaque, and the figures in the foreground are almost fully three-dimensional, while the background details, like the arches of the building, are barely scratched onto the surface. This technique allowed him to create complex, atmospheric scenes that almost look like paintings in stone or bronze. He was using the principles of linear perspective, which were just being developed at the time, and applying them to sculpture. It was another way he pushed the boundaries of his medium, making his art more realistic and immersive than ever before. Later in his career, Donatello was called to the city of Padua to create a massive equestrian monumenta statue of a mercenary general named Gattamelata. Again, this was a huge deal. Large-scale equestrian bronze statues hadn't really been successfully cast since the Roman Empire. The resulting statue is a masterpiece of power and control. The general sits calmly atop a powerful, muscular horse, exuding an aura of calm authority and command. The sheer technical skill required to cast such a large and balanced piece of bronze was astonishing. But beyond the technical feat, the statue became the blueprint for virtually every equestrian monument that followed for centuries. It re-established a grand tradition and solidified Donatello's reputation as a master on par with the ancients. So, when we look at the breathtaking realism of Michelangelo, David, or the intricate compositions of Raphael paintings, we have to remember who helped lay the foundation. Donatello took the rigid forms of the past and breathed life into them. He reintroduced profound psychological depth, pioneered new techniques, and mastered multiple materials. He wasn't just a sculptor. He was a storyteller, a psychologist, and a technical innovator, all rolled into one. He showed the world that a block of stone could hold all the emotion, complexity, and beauty of the human experience. His relentless pursuit of realism didn't just define his own career. It ignited the flames of the High Renaissance and set a new standard for what art could achieve. Titian and the use of color in Venetian painting. Have you ever looked at a painting and felt like the colors were speaking directly to you? Like they were telling a story all on their own, separate from the figures and the scene. Tonight, we're diving into a world where color wasn't just an accessory, but the main event. We were traveling back to the shimmering canals of Renaissance Venice to explore the revolutionary art of one of its greatest masters, Titian. Forget everything you thought you knew about stiff, formal Renaissance portraits. The Venetian school, and Titian in particular, broke the mold. While artists in Florence and Rome were obsessed with perfect lines and sculptural forms, style they called disegno, the Venetians had a different passion. They championed colorito, the belief that color and the application of paint were the ultimate tools for expressing emotion, drama, and the very essence of life. And no one, absolutely no one, did it better than Tiziano Vasilio, or as we know him, So, what made Venetian painting so different? Well, imagined the city itself, Venice was a bustling, cosmopolitan port, a crossroads of trade between East and West. It was a city of shimmering light reflecting off the water, of rich, exotic fabrics, and of dazzling pigments arriving from distant lands. This environment seeped into the very soul of its artists. They saw the world not in sharp outlines, but in patches of light, shadow, and, most importantly, color. They were less concerned with creating a perfect, intellectual drawing underneath their paint, and more interested in building up their compositions directly on the canvas with layers of color. This is where Titian enters the scene, and he takes this colorito philosophy to a whole new level. In his early works, you can see this vibrant, almost joyful explosion of color. Take a look at his masterpiece, Bacchus and Ariadne. The sky isn't just blue, it's a deep, rich ultramarine that feels almost electric. Bacchus's cloak is a swirling storm of crimson, so vivid you can almost feel its texture. The whole scene is alive with energy, and it's the color that drives the narrative, conveying the shock, the passion, and the divine chaos of the moment. Titian wasn't just coloring in a drawing, he was painting with emotion itself. He achieved this through a technique that was nothing short of groundbreaking. He would start with a rough sketch, often in a single color, on a dark or reddish-brown ground. Then he would build up layer after layer of thin, translucent glazes of oil paint. This is key. Oil paint dries slowly, allowing for this incredible blending and layering. Light would pass through these glazes, hit the layers beneath, and bounce back, creating a depth and luminosity that was simply breathtaking. It's like looking at a stained glass window. The colors don't just sit on the surface, they glow from within. As Titian grew older, his style evolved dramatically. His brushwork became looser, freer, and even more expressive. If his early works were about brilliant, clear color, his late works are about atmosphere, mood, and the raw, physical quality of the paint itself. He began to apply paint more thickly, a technique called imp, sometimes even using his fingers to smudge and blend the colors directly on the canvas. From a distance, these paintings resolve into incredibly powerful, emotional scenes. But up close, they dissolve into a mesmerizing dance of brushstrokes and raw pigment. Look at his late masterpiece, The Flaying of Marsyas. It's a brutal, tragic subject, and Titian doesn't shy away from it. But he doesn't render it with cold, clinical precision. Instead, he uses a somber, almost murky palette of reds, browns, and golds. The forms seem to emerge from the shadows, defined not by lines, but by flickering highlights and deep, velvety darkness. The paint itself looks raw, almost wounded. You can feel the artist's hand at work, wrestling with the pigment to express the profound tragedy of the scene. It's in these late works that his nickname, the Sun Amidst Small Stars, given by his contemporaries, truly makes sense. He was manipulating light and shadow with a mastery that was unparalleled. This revolutionary approach to color and paint had a colossal impact on the history of art. Titian showed future generations that a painting could be about the feeling of a subject, not just its appearance. His influence is undeniable. You can see it in the dramatic light and shadow of Caravaggio, in the rich, velvety textures of Rubens, and even in the expressive brushwork of the Impressionists centuries later. Artists like Rembrandt and Velázquez studied his work obsessively, copying his paintings to understand the secrets of color and light. Velázquez himself, when he visited Italy, was more interested in the Venetians and Titian than anyone else. He saw in Titian a new language for painting, a language based on the emotional power of color. So, the next time you read in a museum and you come across a painting by Titian or another Venetian master, I want you to do something. Don't just look at what the painting is asterisk of asterisk. Look at asterisk. How asterisk it's painted. Look at the colors. Are they bright and bold or dark and moody? Look at the brushstrokes. Are they smooth and invisible or thick and energetic? See if you can feel the light, the atmosphere, and the emotion that the artist poured onto that canvas. Because with Titian, you're not just looking at a picture. You're experiencing a symphony of color crafted by one of the greatest masters who ever lived. He taught the world that color isn't just for decoration. It's the very soul of the painting, Masaccio, and the beginning of scientific perspective. Tonight, we're journeying back in time to the heart of the Italian Renaissance, a period bursting with innovation, creativity, and groundbreaking ideas. We're going to talk about a young artist who, in his tragically short life, completely revolutionized the way we see the world on a flat surface. His name was Masaccio, and he's the father of something we now call scientific perspective. So, what exactly is scientific perspective? Before the 15th century, if you looked at most paintings, things often felt a bit flat. Figures might seem to float. Buildings could look wonky. And there wasn't a real sense of depth. Artists knew how to make things smaller to suggest they were farther away. But there wasn't a consistent mathematical system to make it look truly believable, like you could step right into the scene. This is where our story begins, in the bustling city of Florence. Born Tommaso di Ser Giovanni di Simone, the world would come to know him as Masaccio, which translates to sloppy top. It wasn't because his art was messy, far from it. It was likely a nickname pointing to his supposed disregard for his personal appearance and worldly affairs. He was completely and utterly consumed by his art. And it was this single-minded focus that allowed him to make a leap that would change art forever. Around 1425, Masaccio unveiled a masterpiece in the Church of Santa Maria Novella in Florence. It's a fresco called the Holy Trinity. If you ever get the chance to see it in person, you'll be stunned. When you stand before it, it doesn't look like a painting on a wall. It looks like a real recessed chapel has been carved right into the church. The illusion is so powerful that people at the time were said to have gasped, believing the wall had actually been opened up. How did he achieve this incredible effect? Masaccio was the first painter to fully apply the principles of linear perspective, which had been recently worked out by the brilliant architect Filippo Bruni. The idea is based on a simple observation. Parallel lines, like the sides of a road, appear to converge and meet at a single point on the horizon, known as the vanishing point. In the Holy Trinity, Masaccio constructed the entire scene around this principle. If you trace the lines of the coffered barrel vault ceiling in the painting, you'll see they all recede and meet at a single vanishing point. This point is strategically placed at the viewer's eye level, right at the base of the cross. This mathematical precision creates an astonishingly realistic three-dimensional space. It pulls you in, making you feel like you're standing in that very chapel, witnessing this profound moment. But Masaccio didn't just stop with architecture. He applied this sense of realism to his figures too. Look at the people in the painting. They aren't flat, ethereal beings. They have weight, volume, and occupy a real space. The light source in the painting is consistent, casting realistic shadows and modeling their bodies, making them feel solid and tangible. This was a radical departure from the more stylized and graceful figures of the preceding Gothic period. Masaccio's figures were human, grounded, and emotionally resonant. Another of his great works, the frescoes in the Brancacci Chapel, further demonstrates his genius. In scenes, like the tribute money, he tells a complex story in a single frame. Here, you see St. Peter 3 times within the same painting, a technique called continuous narrative. But what's truly remarkable is how Masaccio arranges the figures in a believable space. Christ and the apostles stand in a semicircle, creating a sense of depth. The buildings in the background recede according to the rules of perspective, and the landscape stretches into a hazy, distant horizon, an early use of what we call atmospheric perspective, where objects in the distance appear paler and less detailed. Masaccio's innovations didn't just make paintings look more real. They fundamentally changed the purpose of art. A painting was no longer just a decorative object or a simple storytelling device. It became a window onto another world, a rational, ordered, and mathematically constructed world that mirrored our own. He combined the new science of perspective with a profound understanding of human anatomy and emotion. Tragically, Masaccio died in Rome when he was only 27. We don't know the exact cause, but his life was cut short, just as his artistic revolution was beginning. Yet, his influence was immediate and immense. His frescoes in Florence became a school for the next generation of Renaissance masters. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael all studied his work, learning from his use of perspective, light, and monumental figures. In a way, every realistic painting created in the Western world since the 15th century owes a debt to the pioneering vision of Sloppy Tom. He showed artists how to create not just an image, but an entire world by mastering the geometry of sight. He gave them the power to craft illusions of depth, so convincing that they continued to captivate us. Centuries later, he proved that art could be both a science and a deeply human expression. The next time you see a painting with incredible depth and realism, take a moment to remember the young Florentine genius who first opened that window for all of us. Masaccio's legacy is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a single, brilliant idea and a steady hand. Have you ever looked at a medieval painting and thought, why does everyone look so flat? It's a fair question. For centuries, art was more about symbolism than realism. But then, one man came along and completely changed the game, paving the way for giants like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. His name was Giotto di Bondone, and he's the spark that ignited the Renaissance. Before Giotto, in the 13th and early 14th centuries, the art world was dominated by the Byzantine. Think shimmering gold backgrounds, elongated figures, and faces that all looked pretty similar. The goal wasn't to capture reality, it was to create a heavenly, otherworldly feel. It was beautiful, but it wasn't human. It was art that you looked at, not art that you felt a connection with. Imagine being an artist in Florence around the year 1300. This was your world. Then you walk into a chapel and see Giotto's work. It would have been mind-blowing. Suddenly, you're not just looking at a flat, divine scene. You're looking at people with weight, with substance. They're standing on solid ground, not just floating in a golden void. Their clothes have folds that suggest a real body underneath. This was revolutionary. So, how did Giotto do it? What was his secret sauce? It all comes down to a few key innovations. First, he ditched the flat gold backgrounds. Instead, he painted actual landscapes and architectural settings. This immediately gave his scenes a sense of depth and place. His figures weren't just symbols, they were characters in a real-world story. Second, and this is huge, Giotto mastered the use of light and shadow, a technique we call chiaroscuro, by using darker tones to show where light asterisk is NSNCN. Quotes T asterisk hitting. He could create the illusion of three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface. His figures suddenly had volume and mass. You could almost feel their physical presence. This was a radical departure from the flat, evenly lit figures of the past. But perhaps Giotto's greatest gift was his ability to capture human emotion. Look at his frescoes in the Scroverni Chapel in Padua. In the scene of the Lamentation, you see the raw grief on the faces of the figures surrounding Christ. Mary cradles her son with a look of profound anguish. The angels in the sky are wringing their hands, their faces contorted in sorrow. This wasn't just a religious story, it was a deeply human tragedy. Viewers could see their own feelings of loss and sadness reflected in the painting. For the first time, art was truly relatable. Think about another of his famous scenes from that same chapel, the kiss of Judas. The tension is electric. You see the calm, knowing look on Christ's face as Judas, cloaked in that famous yellow robe, leans in for the betraying kiss. All around them, there's chaos soldiers with torches, disciples in confusion. But the focus is on that central, dramatic moment between two men. Giotto freezes time and lets you feel the weight of that betrayal. He's not just an artist, he's a master storyteller, a director orchestrating a powerful drama. These weren't just pretty pictures. Giotto's work marked a seismic shift in Western thought. It was part of a larger movement we now call humanism, which placed a new emphasis on human experience, potential, and emotion. Giotto showed that the divine could be depicted in a human, understandable way. He brought heaven down to earth and showed us the humanity in sacred stories. His influence was immediate and profound. Artists flocked to study his techniques. The path he blazed led directly to the explosion of creativity in the 15th century, with artists like Michelangelo, who perfected perspective, and Donatello, who brought a new level of realism to sculpture. Without Giotto's brave first steps, there would be no Leonardo's Mona Lisa, no Michelangelo's David he laid the foundation for. Everything we associate with the High Renaissance, he taught artists how to see the world, not just as a collection of symbols, but as a space filled with real people, real emotions, and real drama. So, the next time you see a Renaissance masterpiece, take a moment to remember the man who started it all. Giotto di Bondone wasn't just painting saints and angels. He was painting humanity. He found the extraordinary in the ordinary, and in doing so, taught us how to see art and ourselves in a completely new light. He opened the window to realism, and the art world has never been the same since. Have you ever seen a painting that felt so real, so intense? It was like a scene from a movie, a single light source cutting through the darkness, freezing a moment of pure, raw emotion. If you might have been looking at a work by one of our history's most rebellious and brilliant minds. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, and dramatic lighting. Today, we're diving into the dramatic, turbulent life and groundbreaking work of Caravaggio, the master of light and shadow who forever changed the course of painting. The late Renaissance, around the turn of the 17th century, was a time of great change. The refined, idealized beauty of artists like Raphael was still the gold standard. But in Rome, a new energy was brewing, a desire for something more direct, more powerful, and more human. Into this scene bursts Caravaggio, a man as famous for his hot temper and brawling as he was for his incredible talent. He wasn't interested in painting serene Madonnas or perfect, godlike figures. Caravaggio painted what he saw. He cast peasants, beggars, and common people from the streets of Rome as his saints and holy figures. This was revolutionary and to some scandalous. His Virgin Mary might have tired eyes, his Saint Peter the weathered hands of a fisherman. He brought the divine down to earth, making it relatable and intensely personal. But his most powerful tool, the signature style that would make him immortal, was his use of light. We call it tenebrism, from the Italian word tenebroso, meaning dark or gloomy, but it's more than just dark painting. Tenebrism is a dramatic dance between intense, almost blinding light and deep, enveloping shadow. Look at one of his most famous works, The Calling of Saint Matthew. Jesus stands in the shadows, barely visible, but points a finger, and a beam of light cuts across the dark room. It illuminates a group of tax collectors huddled around a table, their faces a mixture of surprise and suspicion. The light doesn't just illuminate the scene, it asterisk the scene. It's the divine call itself, singling out Matthew, pulling him from his worldly life of greed into a new spiritual one. It's a single, frozen moment of life-altering decision made electric by that shaft of light. Caravaggio didn't use soft, diffused light that gently models figures. His light is harsh, direct, and theatrical. It's like a spotlight on a dark stage. This technique, also known as chiaroscuro, but pushed to its most extreme, does several incredible things. First, it creates unparalleled drama. The stark contrast between light and dark grabs your attention and heightens the emotional intensity. The shadows aren't just empty space. They are full of mystery, danger, and unspoken feeling. What's lurking in the darkness? The unknown becomes as important as what is revealed in the light. Second, it makes his figures incredibly solid and three-dimensional. The light rakes across the surface of a wrinkled brow, the fold of a cloak, or the strain of a muscle, making you feel like you could reach out and touch them. This wasn't the flat, ethereal world of earlier religious painting. This was gritty, tangible reality. Think about his painting, Judith beheading Holofernes. It's a violent, dramatic subject, and Caravaggio doesn't shy away from it. The light falls brutally on the action, highlighting Judith's determined face, the spurting blood, and the horrified expression of the general. The surrounding darkness swallows everything else, forcing us to confront the brutal reality of the moment. It's visceral, shocking, and utterly unforgettable. He makes us witnesses, not just viewers. This radical approach wasn't always popular with the establishment. Some patrons rejected his works, finding them too raw, too undignified for a church altar, but his power was undeniable. Other artists were completely captivated. Painters from all over Europe flocked to Rome to see his work, and an entire generation of artists, known as the Caravaggisti, began to imitate his dramatic style. His influence spread like wildfire, touching everyone from Rembrandt in Holland to Velázquez in Spain. He essentially invented a new visual language. Caravaggio's own life was as dramatic as his canvases. He was constantly in trouble with the law, involved in sword fights, and was eventually forced to flee Rome after killing a man in a brawl. He spent the last years of his life on the run, moving between Naples, Malta, and Sicily, all while continuing to produce some of his most profound and moving works. His later paintings become even darker, more introspective. It's as if the shadows in his art were mirroring the darkness gathering in his own life. In paintings like the beheading of Saint John the Baptist, the figures are almost swallowed by a vast, empty darkness. The light is more subdued, the mood more melancholic and somber. It's the work of a man haunted by his past and uncertain of his future. He died tragically at the age of just 38, alone on a beach, trying to make his way back to Rome for a pardon that had just been granted. So why does Caravaggio still feel so modern, so relevant over 400 years later? Because he painted truth, not the idealized truth of perfect forms, but the messy, complicated, emotional truth of human experience. He understood that life isn't all bright light. It's a constant interplay of light and shadow, of triumph and struggle, of faith and doubt. His dramatic lighting wasn't just a stylistic trick. It was a way of seeing the world. It was a metaphor for the human soul itself. By plunging his scenes into darkness and then piercing them with a single revealing beam of light, Caravaggio showed us that even in the darkest of moments, there can be a flash of grace, a moment of revelation, a spark of humanity that changes everything. Next time you see a film with stark, moody lighting, a photograph with deep shadows, or even a modern painting with dramatic contrasts, take a moment to think of the rebellious genius who first harnessed the power of darkness to tell the most human of stories. Hieronymus Bosch and the Northern Renaissance. But to the cooler, more complex world of the Northern Renaissance, while we often associate the Renaissance with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, a parallel, equally fascinating movement was unfolding in the North, and at its heart was a painter so unique, so visionary, that his work continues to baffle and enchant us 5 centuries later. Hieronymus Bosch. So, what exactly was the Northern Renaissance? Spanning from the 14th to the 17th century in regions like the Netherlands, Germany, and France. This was a period of incredible artistic and intellectual awakening. Unlike their Italian counterparts, who were obsessed with classical antiquity, Northern artists were deeply rooted in Gothic traditions. They were masters of detail, pioneers of oil painting, and their work was often infused with a profound, sometimes somber, Christian symbolism. Artists like Jan van Eyck and Albrecht Dürer weren't just painting. They were capturing reality with a breathtaking, almost microscopic precision. This is the world that gave us Hieronymus Bosch, born around 1450 in the Dutch city of Isor-Dagenbosch, from which he took his name. Bosch was a man of his time, yet completely ahead of it. We actually know very little about his personal life. He was a respected member of his community, a member of the illustrious Brotherhood of Our Lady, a devout religious confrater. Yet, from his mind sprang some of the most bizarre, surreal, and nightmarish imagery in the entire history of art. How did this respectable citizen create such fantastical worlds? That's the mystery we're going to explore. Let's start with his most famous masterpiece, the Garden of Earthly Delights. This incredible triptych, a 3-paneled painting, is a visual symphony of chaos and wonder. When closed, the outer panels show a grayscale depiction of the Earth's creation, a quiet, orderly sphere. But when you open it up, it's an explosion of color and activity. The left panel shows the Garden of Eden, with God presenting Eve to Adam. It seems peaceful at first, but look closer. Strange creatures are already emerging from the water. A sense of unease begins to creep in, hinting that this paradise is fragile. Then we move to the central panel, the garden of earthly delights itself. This is where things get truly wild. It's a vast landscape teeming with nude figures, giant birds, oversized fruit, and bizarre hybrid creatures. People are frolicking, eating enormous strawberries, riding on griffins, and encased in transparent bubbles. For centuries, scholars have debated its meaning. Is it a celebration of a lost paradise, a world without sin? Or is it a dire warning, a depiction of humanity succumbing to temptation and worldly pleasures, completely oblivious to its impending doom? Bosch gives us no easy answers. The scene is both joyful and deeply unsettling, a chaotic panorama of human folly. And then comes the right panel, hell. It is one of the most terrifying visions of damnation ever painted. The vibrant colors of the central panel are replaced with fire, darkness, and chilling blues. Here, the playful sins of the middle panel are punished with grotesque and poetic cruelty. A giant bird-like monster devours sinners and excretes them into a pit. A pair of enormous ears, pierced by an arrow and wielding a blade, marches across a frozen lake. Musical instruments become instruments of torture, a punishment for those who indulged in worldly music. This isn't just a generic hell. It's a personalized, psychological nightmare where every punishment seems to be a twisted reflection of the sin itself. So, where did these incredible visions come from? Bosch was painting at a time of great religious anxiety. The end of the world was a very real fear, and sermons were filled with vivid descriptions of the horrors of hell. He was also likely influenced by medieval illustrated manuscripts, folklore, and even proverbs. Think of the Dutch proverb, to be married under the broomstick, meaning to live together illicitly. Bosch might paint that literally. His work is a dense tapestry of symbols, many of which we've lost the key to. He forces us to look closer, to decipher the moral lessons hidden within the fantastical chaos. But Bosch wasn't just a painter of nightmares. He also created deeply moving religious works. Paintings like Christ carrying the cross show his ability to capture intense human emotion. In this piece, Christ's serene face is surrounded by a mob of grotesque, caricature-like faces, each one a study in human cruelty, ignorance, and malice. The contrast is jarring and powerful. It's a reminder that the monsters Bosch painted weren't just in some fantasy. For him, they walked among us. He saw the potential for both grace and monstrosity within the human soul. Unlike the Italian Renaissance masters who celebrated the idealized human form, Bosch and other northern artists like Peter Bruegel the Elder, who was greatly influenced by Bosch, were more interested in the realities of everyday life and the complexities of human nature. They painted peasants, landscapes, and moral allegories with a down-to-earth realism. This focus on detail and symbolism is a hallmark of the Northern Renaissance. They used the new medium of oil paint to achieve incredible textures and luminous effects, making their worlds feel startlingly real, no matter how fantastical the subject. Bosch's influence was immense and long. In the 20th century, the Surrealists, like Salvador Dali, saw him as their spiritual ancestor. They recognized in his work a deep dive into the subconscious, a dreamlike logic that defied rational explanation. They saw that Bosch was painting from the mind's eye, long before the concept of psychoanalysis even existed. He proved that art could be a window not just into the world around us, but into the strange and uncharted territories of the human imagination. Hieronymus Bosch remains an enigma. Was he a devout moralist, a heretic, with secret knowledge, or simply an artist with an unparalleled imagination. Perhaps he was all three. He stands at a crossroads in history, with one foot in the medieval world of faith and fear, and the other stepping into the modern world of individual psychology and doubt. His paintings are not just historical artifacts. They are living documents that continue to challenge, provoke, and mesmerize us. They remind us that the line between paradise and peril, sanity and madness, is often terrifyingly thin. His work teaches us to look at the world with a more critical eye, to see the strange in the ordinary and the moral in the bizarre. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the weird and wonderful world of Hieronymus Bosch and the Northern Renaissance. It's a testament to the power of art, that these images created over 500 years ago still have the ability to shock and fascinate us today. What do you see in his paintings? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next artistic adventure. See you next time.